She stood alone in a sea of silk and candlelight, and no one saw her. Lady Evelina Blackwood, Duchess of Thornfield, stood by the marble column at the edge of the Whitmore ballroom, a crystal glass of champagne untouched in her gloved hand. The music swirled, laughter rippled, and couples moved past her like water around a stone. She wore a gown of dove-gray satin, elegant and modest, chosen carefully so as not to draw attention. It did not matter. Attention found her anyway, but never the kind a bride of 6 months should receive. A trio of older women draped in jewels paused nearby, their fans fluttering. "She looks nothing like Cordelia, does she?" one murmured, loud enough to carry. "Such a pale shadow after such radiance." Poor Duke Blackwood. He did his duty, of course. The title needed an heir, but one can see his heart is still in the tomb with his first wife. Evelina's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She did not turn her head. She had learned quickly that to react was to give them power. Instead, she let her gaze drift across the ballroom, searching for the man who had brought her here, the man who had spoken his wedding vows without once looking into her eyes. Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Thornfield, stood near the terrace doors, tall and impossibly handsome in his midnight blue evening coat. Silver threaded his dark hair at the temples, lending him a distinguished severity that made lesser men stumble over their words. He was speaking with Lord Ashby, his expression cool and unreadable. As Evelina watched, his gaze flickered in her direction for the briefest moment, then passed over her as if she were part of the architecture. That small, silent dismissal cut deeper than any whispered insult. She had been invisible before. As the plain second daughter of a debt-ridden baron, she had learned to fade into wainscoting at social gatherings. But to be invisible as a wife, as a duchess, standing in a room full of people who all knew her husband had married her only for her bloodline and a swift heir, that was a different species of loneliness entirely. She set down the champagne and walked toward the terrace. No one stopped her. The night air was crisp, scented with early autumn roses. Evelina gripped the stone balustrade and breathed slowly, willing the ache in her chest to subside. She had known what this marriage was. Her father had not hidden the terms. The Duke of Thornfield needed a young wife of decent breeding to secure the succession and provide a mother for his motherless daughter. In return, her family's crushing debts would be paid, her younger brother's education secured. It was a transaction. She had signed the contract with her name and her hope, believing, foolishly, that something softer might grow in the soil of duty. For the first month she had tried. She had learned the household rhythms, sought out little Amelia in the nursery, arranged fresh flowers in the great hall, and greeted Alexander each evening with a careful, hopeful smile. He had answered her efforts with polite distance. "Thank you, Your Grace. The roses are lovely. Amelia requires no disturbance to her routine. I shall take dinner in my study tonight." Every gentle overture had been met with a door quietly closed, and soon she had stopped knocking. Evelina heard footsteps on the flagstones behind her and turned, heart leaping for a single traitorous second before she recognized the figure. It was not her husband. It was Mr. Lawrence Pelham, the estate's steward, a pleasant-faced man with kind eyes who had shown her more respect in their brief acquaintance than Alexander had in half a year. "Your Grace, are you unwell? The night has turned chilly," he said, concern genuine in his voice. She managed a small smile. "I merely needed air. The ballroom is rather warm." He hesitated, as if debating whether to speak further. "Forgive my boldness, but you have been standing alone for some time. Might I fetch you a shawl or—" "No, thank you, Mr. Pelham. I shall return inside shortly." He nodded, but his gaze lingered with something that looked dangerously like sympathy. Before he could say more, a shadow fell across the terrace doorway. Alexander stood there, his expression carved from granite. "Pelham," the Duke said, voice low and even, "Lady Thornfield does not require assistance." The steward bowed immediately and withdrew. Alexander did not move from the threshold. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, fixed on Evelina with an intensity that stole her breath. For a suspended moment, something unreadable flashed across his face, displeasure perhaps or something sharper. Then it was gone. "You should not be out here alone," he said. "People will talk." Evelina's chin lifted a fraction. "They already talk, Your Grace. My presence or absence does not alter that." Something flickered in his jaw. He offered her his arm. "Come, it is time we returned to Thornfield." She placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the rigid muscle beneath the fine wool. He escorted her through the ballroom, past the whispering matrons and curious glances, his pace unhurried but distant. He did not look at her. He did not speak. And in the carriage home, the silence between them was so vast it felt like a third passenger. That night Evelina stood before the mirror in her private chambers, unpinning her hair and stared at her own reflection. She was 22 years old. She had a gentle heart, a quick mind, and a yearning to be loved that she had never spoken aloud. But the Duchess staring back at her looked tired, faded, invisible. She had married for duty, but somewhere along the way she had fallen quietly, desperately in love with a man who could not see past the ghost of his first wife. And she could not live like this forever. The morning brought a thin, pale sunlight and a tentative knock at her door. Evelina opened it to find little Lady Amelia, all of 4 years old, clutching a rag doll and looking up with enormous blue eyes, Alexander's eyes. "Good morning, Your Grace," the child whispered, using the formal address the governess had taught her. Evelina's heart squeezed. She knelt so they were eye to eye. "Good morning, sweet one. You may call me Evie if you like." Amelia's brow furrowed. "Mama called me sweet one." The words were not accusatory, only wondering. "I know," Evelina said gently, "and you shall always remember her, but I would very much like to be your friend if you will allow it." The child considered this for a long moment. Then she held out her doll. "Her name is Lily. She needs a ribbon. Nurse says you are good with ribbons." It was such a small thing, a frayed satin ribbon. But as Evelina sat on the nursery floor and carefully tied a perfect bow around the doll's waist, something shifted inside her. She might not be able to reach Alexander's heart, but perhaps she could build a small, warm world of her own within these cold stone walls. And so she did. Over the following weeks, Evelina slowly stopped waiting by the window for a husband who never came. She stopped setting out his favorite books in the library and preparing little notes of household news that he never acknowledged. Instead, she poured her energy into the estate and the people on it. She visited the tenant farms with baskets of preserves and listened to their troubles with genuine attention. She reorganized the still room, learning remedies from the housekeeper and delivering tonics to the village sick. She spent hours in the garden with Amelia, planting late-blooming chrysanthemums and telling stories about knights and lost princesses. The child began to laugh more, to seek her out in the mornings, to slip a small, warm hand into hers without prompting. The staff noticed. Mrs. Hargrove, the stern housekeeper who had served the first Duchess Cordelia for years, began to nod at Evelina with something warmer than duty. The tenants spoke of the new Duchess with gratitude. Even the vicar mentioned her kindness at Sunday service. And somewhere in the midst of it, Evelina's own heart began to change. The aching loneliness did not vanish, but it softened into something quieter. She still loved Alexander. She suspected she always would. But she no longer let that love be a wound she pressed on each day. She let it become a scar, closed and bearable. She was learning to live without his love. The first crack in Alexander's ice appeared on a Thursday afternoon, during a moment so ordinary it almost escaped her notice. Evelina was in the east drawing room, helping Amelia practice her letters on a slate, when the door opened and the Duke walked in. This in itself was unusual. He rarely entered rooms where she was. He stopped just inside the threshold, as though he had expected the space to be empty. Amelia looked up and smiled. "Papa, look, Evie taught me to write my name." Alexander's gaze dropped to the slate. His daughter's uneven letters spelled Amelia. Then it shifted to Evelina, who was watching him with a calm, unreadable expression. "That is fine work," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "You are attentive to her education." Evelina inclined her head. "She is a clever child. She learns quickly." He seemed about to say something else, but the words never came. He simply stood there, his presence filling the sunny room like a dark cloud, until Amelia tugged at his coat. "Will you stay, Papa? You can write your name too." For a fleeting instant something cracked in his cold facade, but he stepped back. "Not today, I have business with Pelham." And he left. Evelina watched him go, a flicker of confusion stirring in her chest. It was the longest exchange they had shared in weeks. The second crack came days later, and it was uglier. A small fever swept through the estate, the kind of autumn sickness that afflicted children and the elderly. Amelia fell ill first, a hot forehead, a fretful cry, and a cough that rattled in her tiny chest. Evelina did not leave the nursery. She sent for Dr. Whitfield, the local physician, a man of quiet competence and gentle manners who had served Thornfield for years. He arrived within the hour, examined the child, and prescribed cool compresses and a tincture. "She will recover, Your Grace, but she must be watched closely through the night," he said. "I will stay with her," Evelina said. Dr. Whitfield looked at her with something like admiration. "You have a steady hand and a calm presence. The child is fortunate." For 2 days Evelina barely slept. She bathed Amelia's brow, soothed her through coughing fits, read stories until her voice grew hoarse. Alexander came to the nursery door once, his face pale and tight with worry, but he did not step inside. He simply stood there, watching Evelina hold his daughter, and then he turned away without a word. When the fever finally broke and Amelia slept peacefully, Evelina emerged, exhausted but relieved. Dr. Whitfield met her in the corridor and they spoke quietly about convalescence and nourishing broths. He smiled at her, warm and open. "You should rest yourself, Your Grace. You have given all your strength to her." She smiled back, the first genuine smile she had felt in days. "I would do it again without hesitation." Neither of them noticed the Duke standing at the end of the hallway, half in shadow, watching. But Alexander saw everything. He saw the physician's easy smile. He saw the way Evelina's tired face softened in response. And something hot and unfamiliar coiled in his chest, something he had no right to feel. He turned and walked away before they could see him. That evening, Evelina was called to the library. She entered to find Alexander standing by the window, a glass of brandy in his hand, his back to her. The room smelled of leather and old fire smoke. "You wish to see me, Your Grace?" He did not turn. "The physician, he is often here." She blinked. "Dr. Whitfield has attended Amelia and several tenants. He is a capable man." "He is a man, and you are a duchess. Your familiarity with him has been noted." Evelina felt a chill spread through her. "My familiarity? I have only done my duty to the sick, nothing more." Now he turned and his eyes were sharp. "I do not question your conduct. I caution you about appearances." For the first time in months, a spark of real anger kindled inside her. "Appearances," she repeated quietly. "You, who left me standing alone at a ballroom for 2 hours, speak to me of appearances. You, who have not shared a meal with me in a fortnight, lecture me on familiarity." The words hung in the air. Alexander's expression flickered, a muscle tightening in his jaw. He looked almost wounded, but the mask returned quickly. "You are my wife," he said, voice low. "I will not have your reputation questioned." Evelina drew a slow breath. "Your wife, yes, I am that, a title, a duty, a signature on a contract, but I am not a woman, you see, and I have long since stopped expecting you to." She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. Inside the library, Alexander stood motionless for a long time. The brandy remained untouched. Something was shifting, deep in a place he had sealed shut 2 years ago. He had married Evelina Stanton because the estate needed a future, and Amelia needed a mother's presence. He had chosen her from a list of suitable candidates: gentle breeding, no scandal, a family desperate enough to accept a cold arrangement. He had told himself that he felt nothing, that his heart had been buried with Cordelia in the Thornfield crypt. But Cordelia had been sunlight and laughter. She had filled every room. She had looked at him as if he were her entire world, or so he had believed. Marrying another had felt like a betrayal of that memory. And so he had punished himself by keeping Evelina at arm's length, and in doing so, he had punished her too. Now, watching her from the edges of his own house, he saw things he had refused to see before. He saw how Amelia's face lit up when Evelina entered the nursery. He saw how the tenants' eyes softened with genuine gratitude when she visited their cottages. He saw her walking through the rose garden alone, her shoulders straight but her eyes distant, and something in his chest ached with a slow, spreading guilt. And he saw, with a sharpness that startled him, the way Lawrence Pelham looked at her. The steward had always been loyal, efficient, and discreet, but lately Alexander noticed small things. Pelham found reasons to be in the same wing of the house where Evelina happened to be. He brought her reports on estate yields that could easily have waited. He fetched her shawl at a village fair when the wind turned sharp, and he looked at her as if she were not invisible at all. One afternoon, Alexander happened upon them in the orangery. Evelina was showing Pelham the new lemon trees she had ordered from Italy, her face animated with enthusiasm. Pelham laughed at something she said, a genuine, easy laugh, and she laughed in return. It was a sound Alexander had never heard from her, bright and unguarded, and it stopped him cold. He stood hidden by a pillar, watching his wife smile at another man, and a terrible realization bloomed inside him. Jealousy was a bitter, jagged thing. It clawed at his ribs and whispered cruel truths. She was slipping away. She was finding warmth elsewhere, and it was entirely his own doing. He retreated to his study and sat in silence until the candles burned low. Evelina, meanwhile, felt the ground shifting beneath her feet but could not name the cause. The Duke's behavior had become strange. He appeared at meals now, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He asked her opinion on trivial matters, the color of new draperies, the menu for a small dinner party, as if testing the sound of her voice. He lingered in doorways, his dark eyes tracking her movements like a man studying a map he had never learned to read. It unsettled her. It also awakened a tiny, stubborn ember of hope that she immediately tried to smother. She had been burned too many times by that particular fire. So she retreated into her own quiet world. She deepened her friendships in the village. She took on the task of cataloging the Thornfield Library, a monumental project that kept her mind occupied. She wrote letters to her younger brother and read novels in the window seat. And when the Duke sent word that he wished to dine with her privately one evening, she accepted with outward calm and inward trembling. The dinner was held in the small family dining room, not the grand hall. Candles flickered between them, a simple meal of roasted pheasant and autumn vegetables. Alexander sat across from her, his cravat slightly loosened, a sign of discomfort she had never seen in him before. "I have been remiss," he said at last, his voice low, "as a husband." Evelina set down her fork. Remiss is a gentle word. A ghost of a pained smile touched his lips. "I deserve harsher ones." He leaned forward, his eyes searching her face. "I married you and then abandoned you to silence. I left you to face society's whispers alone. I made you feel unseen in your own home." She swallowed hard. "Why are you saying this now?" "Because I am beginning to see what I have done," he said, and his voice cracked on the final word. "And because I am terrified that I have seen it too late." The confession hung in the candlelight. Evelina's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being yearned to reach across the table and take his hand. But fear held her back, fear that this was a fleeting guilt, that tomorrow he would retreat again into his cold fortress and leave her bleeding on the drawbridge. I have learned to live without your affection, she whispered. It nearly destroyed me, but I learned. I cannot survive being pulled back into hope only to have it taken away again. Pain flashed across his face, raw and unmasked. I know, and I have no right to ask for your trust, but I am asking, Evelina. It was the first time he had spoken her name. Before she could answer, a knock at the door shattered the moment. A footman entered, bowing quickly. Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but there is a matter requiring your attention in the village. The miller's cottage has caught fire. Alexander rose instantly, his expression shifting back to the commanding Duke. I will go. He turned to Evelina, and for one suspended breath, he caught her hand and pressed it once fiercely. We are not finished with this conversation. Then he was gone, and she sat alone in the candlelight, her hand still tingling from his touch. The fire was extinguished with little loss, but Alexander's absence stretched into the next day and the day after, as estate emergencies often did. In that space, something unexpected happened. Evelina was clearing out an old storage room in the East Tower, making space for a new linen press, when she found a small wooden chest pushed behind a stack of dusty ledgers. It was locked, but the mechanism was old and rusted. A quick twist with a letter opener and the lid creaked open. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, looping, a woman's hand. Evelina's breath caught as she unfolded the top letter and read the first line. My dearest William. It was a love letter, passionate longing, full of whispered secrets and promises. Signed, yours forever, Cordelia. Evelina's hands began to shake. She read another and another. The letters spanned months, some dated before Cordelia's marriage to Alexander, some after. They spoke of stolen meetings, of regret, of a love that burned brighter than duty. One line seared itself into her memory. I married the Duke because my family demanded it, but my heart has never once belonged to him. The letters had been hidden. Cordelia had kept them, treasured them, buried them in a forgotten room of the house where Alexander never went. Evelina sat on the dusty floor, the letters spread around her like fallen leaves. Compassion and horror warred in her chest. Alexander had mourned a woman he believed had loved him completely. His guilt, his distance, his frozen heart, all of it was built on a beautiful lie. She did not know what to do with this truth. For 3 days she kept the letters hidden in her own chambers. She barely slept. She watched Alexander move through the house, still grave and guarded, and felt the weight of the secret pressing against her ribs. Telling him would shatter the memory he clung to. It might free him, or it might destroy him. And if she told him, would he believe her? Or would he see it as a cruel attempt to erase Cordelia's place in his heart and claim it for herself? The uncertainty paralyzed her. Then Dr. Whitfield called at the house on a matter of village health, and Alexander happened to pass through the entrance hall while Evelina was bidding the physician goodbye. The doctor bowed to the Duke. Your Grace, Her Grace has been invaluable in organizing the parish relief. The village is deeply grateful. Alexander's expression was unreadable. Indeed. He waited until Whitfield had departed, then turned to Evelina. You spend a great deal of time in the village. I find purpose there, she said evenly. A beat of silence. Purpose you do not find here. She met his eyes. I did not say that. But he heard the unsaid words. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. I meant what I said at dinner. I have been a fool, a blind, stubborn fool. And I see now that you have built a life that does not include me, a life full of kindness and respect and warmth. I want to be part of it. I want to earn my place in it. Evelina felt her resolve tremble. You speak of earning, but trust is a fragile thing. It cannot be commanded. Then tell me what you need. Tell me how to begin. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she had never seen before. Fear. The Duke of Thornfield, who commanded lands and wealth and political power, was afraid of losing her. Before she could answer, a small voice piped from the stairs. "Papa, Evie, are you fighting?" Amelia stood there, doll clutched to her chest, her face crumpled with worry. Alexander's composure fractured. He scooped his daughter into his arms. "No, sweetheart, we are only talking." He looked at Evelina over the child's dark curls, his eyes holding a desperate plea. Evelina reached out and smoothed Amelia's hair. "We are quite all right, little one." And in that moment, standing together in the sunlit hall, they looked almost like a family. The turning point came a week later, when Lawrence Pelham requested a private word with Evelina in the garden. It was a crisp afternoon, the sky a pale porcelain blue. Pelham stood by the ornamental pond, his hat in his hands, his manner unusually nervous. "Your Grace, I must speak honestly," he began. "I have long admired your strength and your grace under difficult circumstances. I know the Duke has not valued you as he should." Evelina stiffened. "Mr. Pelham, I am not certain this is appropriate." "Forgive me. I only wish to say that if you ever find yourself in need of a friend, a true friend who sees you as you deserve to be seen, I am here." He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but far too familiar. "You deserve to be happy." She gently withdrew her hand. "I thank you for your kindness, but my happiness is my own to find, and my place is here at Thornfield." Pelham's face fell, but he nodded respectfully and withdrew. What neither of them saw was Alexander, standing frozen on the garden path, having approached in search of Evelina. He had witnessed the scene, the steward holding his wife's hand, the intimate tone, the soft refusal. He watched Pelham walk away, and then he turned and went back into the house with a storm raging in his chest. That evening he found Evelina in the library. She was standing by the window, the hidden chest of letters at her feet. She had finally decided that the truth, however painful, must be known. He entered without knocking, his face pale and set. "I saw you with Pelham," he said, voice rough. "He touched your hand, he offered you. What? Escape, affection." Evelina met his gaze steadily. "He offered me friendship, and I declined anything more. You must trust me in that, Alexander." The use of his given name stopped him. He dragged a hand through his hair. "I am learning that trust is terrifying. I have held myself apart for so long, and now I cannot bear the thought of losing what I never truly had." She bent and lifted the wooden chest, placing it on the table between them. "Then before we speak of trust, there is something you must see. Something I found in the East Tower." He frowned. "What is this?" "Letters," she said quietly, "written by Cordelia." The name struck him like a physical blow. He stared at the chest, and for a long moment she thought he would refuse. Then slowly he opened the lid and began to read. She watched his face as he moved from confusion to shock, from shock to a kind of raw, agonized disbelief. He read each letter, his hands trembling, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. When he reached the final one, the one that spoke of a heart that had never been his, he set the papers down with terrible care. "She never loved me," he said, and his voice was hollow. "All these years I have been mourning a lie. I kept you at a distance out of guilt for betraying a ghost that was never truly mine." Evelina moved around the table and stood before him. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I did not want to hurt you, but you deserve the truth." He lifted his eyes to hers, and they were bright with unshed tears. You are the one who deserves more. You came into this house with an open heart, and I froze you out because I was clinging to a memory that was never real. How do I begin to make amends for that?" Her own eyes blurred. "You begin by seeing me now, not as a duty, not as a replacement, but as me." Alexander reached out and cupped her face with both hands, his touch trembling. "I see you, Evelina. I see the woman who nursed my daughter through fever, who brought life back to these cold halls, who smiled at me even when I did not deserve it. I see you, and I am terrified that I have wounded you beyond repair." A tear slipped down her cheek, and he brushed it away with his thumb. She leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth she had craved for so long, and the last wall inside her began to crumble. "I loved you," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Even when you were distant, even when I tried to stop. I loved you, and I was so tired of loving alone." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "You are not alone anymore. I swear it. I will spend every day showing you if you let me." She buried her face in his chest and wept, not from sorrow but from release. The long, aching drought was over. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. Healing was not a single conversation but a slow, deliberate rebuilding. Alexander did not suddenly transform into a poetic romantic. He remained a man of few words, a man whose stoic exterior had been decades in the making. But he came to the breakfast table every morning. He walked with her in the garden and asked about her day. He sat on the nursery floor and helped Amelia build towers of wooden blocks while Evelina read aloud. He fired Lawrence Pelham not out of petty jealousy, but because the man's behavior had indeed crossed a line, and he did it without anger, with a generous severance and a letter of recommendation. And at night, he would come to the sitting room that connected their chambers, and they would talk in the firelight about small things and large things. He told her about his childhood, about the pressure of the dukedom, about the loneliness he had never admitted to anyone. She told him about her own family, her secret love of astronomy, her girlish dreams of a marriage built on more than obligation. One evening, as autumn deepened into winter, he took her hand and led her to the music room, where a single candle burned on the pianoforte. "I had this tune for you," he said. "I remember you mentioned once that you used to play." Evelina sat at the instrument, her fingers finding the keys. She played a simple, sweet melody, a folk song her mother had taught her. Alexander stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and when the last note faded, he bent and pressed a kiss to her hair. "I have something to tell you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I did not marry you out of love, but I love you now. I love you, Evelina, and I am sorry it took me so long to find the words." She turned on the bench and looked up at him, her heart so full it ached. "I love you too, Alexander, and I forgive you, all of it." He knelt before her, this proud, powerful duke, and took both her hands. "Then let us begin again, not as a contract, not as duty, as two people who choose each other every day." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she whispered, "yes." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing Thornfield in white, as if the world itself were being made new. And inside the great stone house, in the warm glow of candlelight, a duchess who had once been invisible was finally, completely seen.